Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back from lunch. We are here with Sean and Nick for Trusted Access and Jamf Connect, or Jamf Connect and Trusted Access for those playing along at home. I'm sure most of you have been in sessions, so we know the drill. Q&A is a little bit different this year, so we'll all use the JNUC app. So if you want to go ahead and pop that open if this is your first session, go to the session Q&A, scroll through the list, find this session. Go ahead, type in your questions as the presenters are doing their thing up here, and afterwards I'll be back up on stage to moderate that portion of today's event. So without further ado, Sean and Nick.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us here today. My name is Nick McGilvery, and I'm a senior security SC based out of the Bay Area. And I'm joined by the one and only Sean.
Hello, the man, the myth, the mohawk. I am Sean Rabbit, Senior Consulting Engineer for Identity and Access Management here at Jamf.
And we are very excited today to talk about Jamf Connect and really, what this entails. Let me go to the next slide here. Awesome. So we're going to talk about, what is Jamf Connect today? What does that actually mean? What are the two, I would say, critical components? Some of the tools and requirements needed for this solution, the deployment, and then lastly, we're going to touch on a brief demo. So, without further ado, Sean, I'll leave it to you.
Thank you. Whoa. You got a preview of all of our slides there in one shot. Can you rewind our slides? Thanks.
Perfect. Quick.
Uno momento, por favor. I'll do my little dance.
Yeah.
I can tell some jokes. It'll be great. There we go.
All right. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. So, if you've been around for the last couple of years and gone to a JNUC or watched a video, you've probably seen me up here talking about Jamf Connect and how it's a great option for onboarding brand new users and keeping passwords in sync for users and getting Kerberos tickets and your zero-touch onboarding solution and blah, 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 blah. We're going to listen to Rabbit talk about that again. You signed up for this session, not me. Just remember that. But the answer is yes, it's still that. It's still all that. And even in the world of enrollment single sign-on and platform single sign-on, there is still use for Jamf Connect for that piece today, especially for the creation of new user accounts just in time. The next piece, though, that comes with the new licensing for Jamf Connect is our Zero Trust Network Access solution. So the big problem is we have some twofer. Remember what Jamf Connect was originally designed to replace. We were all on premise. We were binding Macs to AD. Sorry, I swore again. The computers never left. There were nice desktop machines, and that was great. They could sit there in the lab, and they'll never go away. And then something happened. Oh, yeah, they came out with laptops. See, you thought I was going to say something else. They came out with laptops, and people started leaving, and binding wasn't that great because eventually a device is going to come unbound. But then we had a little occurrence in the healthcare industry, I think is what the best way to describe it is, and then everyone had to go home. So AD on-prem was unobtainium. And so we had to go to cloud identity providers and be able to have that identity someplace. We had to stop binding people. And honestly, identity for Macs up to that point has been one of two options. Either you are an individual little island of identity, or you are tied and bound to AD. Well, that's what Jamf Connect came out to try to automate that process, so make it a little bit less crazy for our admins today who need to reset passwords and try to manage all their user rights in one place. So what Jamf Connect does for you up to this point has always been, it creates user accounts just in time on a Mac, so you could drop it onto a computer as part of your zero-touch onboarding experience. You don't actually have to physically touch it as an administrator, which, let's face it, this is our job as administrators, to be as lazy as humanly possible. We don't want to touch those computers. So. And then it brings a modern authentication system to that Macintosh, so that way people are able to take advantage of things like device authentication policies from Okta, or conditional access policies from Microsoft, or listening to our cyber insurance requirements now suddenly making it so we have to have multi-factor authentication in all of our logins. We can do that, something you can't do with platform single sign-on, even when it does eventually come out for that piece. And lastly is the piece that could theoretically be exchanged out for PSSOE, which is the password sync over the long run. As that computer is being used, if a user changes their password on their Microsoft Entra ID login page. They go into Ping Fed. They send a letter to their third grade teacher who changes and presses a button. Whatever it is they've changed their password, however they do it, whatever the process is, we can keep the password in sync.
And maybe I'll let you do the clicker if that's okay.
That's fine with
I got
me.
fired already from it. So
That's okay. Still love you.
So Sean just covered the identity and access management piece, but what's been a recent addition is now on the Zero Trust network access front. So now we're going to kind of talk about some of the mishaps, if you will, with legacy VPN and where this Jamf Connect solution can kind of fill in those gaps. And then we're going to talk about how, these pieces play well together. So for starters, from a legacy VPN perspective, I wanted to put up a couple of issues that we've seen in the past. First thing being that hardware can be very pricey. The network stack is often quite complex, and maybe only a handful or a different group of users know how to scale that solution out. And the main thing I wanted to mention is the certificates. So whether it's managing or renewing certificates, I've found that working with different security and IT admins, this piece can be difficult to scale because of that. The second piece is, yes, this has great security, but is the end user experience very good? Who knows? In my prior job, I know multiple times per day, for instance, I would have to log into the VPN. I'd be trying to, fill out a SaaS app or an enterprise app, and sometimes it would be logged out. So, yes, the security was great, but maybe it wasn't the best user experience. And the third and final piece, I love this little castle clip art here. I'm very proud of it. I like to consider this legacy VPN like a castle in the sense, I'll even use a Game of Thrones castle, in the sense being that, with Game of Thrones, there's a gatekeeper, but once that user or set of users get beyond the gatekeeper and into the castle, yes, they'll get access to their application, but there's a chance for east and west lateral movement. There's a chance to potentially see other unwanted apps, and we've seen some of those attacks over the last couple of years. Perfect. So, insert Jamf Connect. How can we help simplify the admin and the end user experience? Is we're utilizing your identity provider for authentication. So no longer do you have to manage or renew different certificates. It's all about signing in with your IDP, and once you do that one singular time, and we'll touch on that point a little bit later, you'll get access to whatever SaaS and enterprise apps you'd like. The second piece is that it's lightning fast in the sense that we're based on WireGuard protocols, so it's all single packet authentication, which is really good for your SaaS applications, and then we're going to talk about how we do enterprise app access as well. And the third and final piece is we can actually use risk-based access control, which basically is a fancy way of saying, hey, do I have malware on my device? Does my device not have a passcode? Maybe I'm on a vulnerable OS that's found on a recent Apple CV. Let's go ahead and make it so the user remediates before we give them access to that AWS app or before we give them access to their email. So this is where the ZTNA really can help you out. And before I toss it back over to Sean, I wanted to put this very pretty picture in here. We're really focusing on the left-hand side, that software-defined perimeter. So yes, sadly, we're moving away from that Game of Thrones castle example, but we're saying, does the user have correct access, and is their device security safe enough? Let's give them a per app, per connection access to that application, whether it be a SaaS or enterprise application. And just for what it's worth, on the right-hand side, we can still provide similar endpoint and network security and do things like content filtering, but that would be more for your general internet traffic through Jamf Protect. Sean, I'll toss it back to you.
Thank you. And I think this actually fills in pretty good that one last little place where people were still bound and on-prem, right? They needed to get access to the resources. Well, what did you have to do with Jamf Connect up to this point? You had to have some sort of VPN. This takes care of that last piece. Let's get rid of the VPN and we'll put it all in one license. So let's talk a little bit about the required tools and what you're going to need to do to set this up. The good news is that I believe we just made an announcement that said that all y'all have access to this all the time. So if you go to account.jamf.com for all our on-premise attendees here, you should be able to go see some of these new tools, including access to Jamf Connect inside there. You are going to need access to a cloud identity provider of some form. Jamf Connect still does require that you be using a cloud identity provider, no on-premises Active Directory. Sorry, classic folks out there. However, if you do want some ideas of tying an on-premises Active Directory to some cloud identity provider, I happen to know there's a person from Microsoft over here. And I also know there's somebody from Okta here who will have that conversation very happily. We'll work with also things like the One Identity team there, the One Login team. We'll work with Google Cloud as well as some legacy things like PingFed out there as well. So you're going to need the Jamf Connect login distribution package first. That's going to be how you're going to do the primary configuration of the application. You'll need access to the Jamf Trust app, which is actually a VPP application for both iOS and macOS. They're real easy to install on there. And you'll need access to Jamf's new security cloud, which you now should have access to via your account.jamf.com. Now it shouldn't come as a shock to you anymore that Jamf is not just Apple, my friend. Sorry, the right people will understand what that acronym doesn't mean, but that's okay. There is the network access portion, the ZTNA portion, actually is designed to work on a network layer, so therefore it will work multi-platform, including on Windows devices and Android devices. For the identity provider pieces, you do need to have, of course, a Mac for that to work. Doesn't work iOS just quite yet. And the collaboration piece, you're going to need to actually talk to your coworkers. I apologize. I've used that joke many times in the past. Chances are, how many Mac admins here actually have full admin rights on their identity provider? Yeah, so you're running about 30% of the audience there. The rest of you got to talk to your coworkers. Sorry, I apologize. So you're going to need to get that global admin rights in order to do a lot of that stuff. The way of order of operations for deploying this out to people, I recommend where you set up Jamf Connect on the macOS devices first, because the macOS is going to give you the most debugging information to test out your VPN versus doing things on iOS and Android later. And then once you got Jamf Connect set up, you'll push out Jamf Trust. We'll talk a little bit about I apologize, we recorded this a little while ago, so there might be some trickery in this video. Shh, don't tell anyone.
Yeah.
But coming soon will be some new features, and then you'll be able to set up your policies in Jamf Security Cloud. I'm going to go over the Jamf Connect stuff because I've done this so many wonderful times before in the past. In fact, you may have even seen me talk about setting up the config settings and app catalog and deploying things out. That's why there's this lovely QR code here that will explain to you how to actually do this step by step without having to memorize everything right this second. Refer to the fantastic manual, RTFM. There's a lot of good information inside there, but this QR code will do the first step, which is how do I actually set up the identity provider part before I jump into the rest of the Jamf Connect part. Each identity provider handles OIDC ever so slightly differently. That's why we try to write out those instructions as best as possible, depending on the individual IDP, and give you some step-by-step inside there. Should you run into any issues, though, of course, you hit up support, not just for Jamf, but also hit up your identity provider support as well. They can help out with setting up OIDC apps. I'm sure they know Jamf at this point. There we go. The second piece is once we have that identity provider, we can test out the configuration using the Jamf Connect config app on your Mac. You do need any Mac. This could be your prod Mac even if you wanted to, but inside the disk distribution image is a test application. Apologies in advance, written by engineers for engineers, so just keep in mind that if it doesn't work right away, don't panic. But this is where you can actually go in and create those XML plist files for deploying out to your Macs. You'll go in and the absolute minimum, you pick your identity provider, and the very top of the screen will show you the minimum required keys. Most of the time, that's just going to be the OIDC app registration, the ROPG app registration, which is most likely going to be the same, but just in case you were in our previous session about conditional access with Microsoft, will be different. And then the tenant ID. We have to tell it which tenant to go out and talk to. You'll whack a big friendly test button up in the upper right corner. There'll be two tests up there. It'll either say OIDC and ROPG, or you'll be using Okta, and the traditional Okta identity engine or Okta Classic will show up as a button. Hit the button, log in. Get a nice friendly, you got tokens. If that succeeds, you're good to go. If it doesn't, it should give you some error messages to help you along your way. You are baking a cake, not making a steak when you are setting up the identity provider. Nobody wants a medium rare cake. Please follow the instructions on the side of the box precisely when setting up your identity provider. We do, again, have all of the identity provider setup steps here for you available in this QR code through the Jamf training catalog as well. So nice and easy. You can actually get additional information about all the other cute buttons that are inside Jamf Connect. You can make it look nice and generic. You can make it look really pretty and customized. There's lots of options inside there. There's even an option to run a script every time someone logs into a Mac, which is extremely useful in shared computer environments, so you can tell Jamf Pro, hey, a new user's been assigned to this device. Really cool stuff you can do with it. Mac Admin Slack has got a billion different ideas to it. Lastly, get the configuration into Jamf Pro any way that you want to. You could either upload it directly using an API user. You could use it, just copy pasta right from the plist, drop it into a custom application settings payload. You could recreate the whole payload if you wanted to inside Jamf Pro, if you desire. One little note on that too, since people ask me all the time. If you do decide to make your configuration in Jamf Pro, there's a button that says, which version of Jamf Connect is this for? Like 2.27, 2.26, and people think they need to recreate it every time a new version of Jamf Connect comes out. You do not. That version number inside Jamf Pro is for these are the keys that existed at the time that version was released. So unless there's brand new keys that you want to add in, you don't have to recreate it over and over again. You can just have it be a key set from 2.19 forever if you want to. You never change anything out. Or just do what we do and upload. It's real simple and easy that way. That way you can edit it later if you need to. We're going to deploy that out to our Macs in the world. You can pick it out with a smart computer group of any desired way that you wish. There are some new restrictions for operating system versions. Sorry, 10 people. We may have finally deprecated that after some period of time. There's a couple ways to get the Jamf Connect package onto your computer, but if you're just doing some nice, easy testing, it's in the Jamf App Store. You can actually just say, okay, for the computer group that has the configuration on it, deploy out the package automatically, and it installs and keeps it up to date for you. Works really well. Just one note, the installer package that you're deploying here actually detects the presence of the config profile on the device. So if you don't deploy the config profile first, you'll send out Jamf Connect with no instructions of what to do, and you're going to have a bad day. So get that config profile on there first, then you're good to go. Now, once you've got this working on a non-production test machine, that's the point where you can go out and play with it via zero touch. The configuration is basically the same. You've already done all the work. You have the config profiles onto the box for you right now. All you need to do is go in there to your pre-stage for your config and say, no, I don't want Apple to make the user account for me during Setup Assistant. Skip the Setup Assistant instead. Now, you are still stuck with making a generic username that's a required account as part of the MDM spec for the pre-stage here. So you're going to get an admin account with a set username on there and a set password. But you can do a couple of things. You could either nuke that account with the policy if you don't want it on there at all, which is the best way to do it in my opinion, or you can now use this user as a pseudo lapse account. So you can actually go in and create a policy that says, make this the lapse user, and it will automatically rotate the password anytime the password's used or immediately when the policy is applied for the first time. Remember, this user is not MDM, this user is both not an MDM-enabled user and is not a file vault-enabled user, and your best practice still is you want to make sure that to get into this account, you still have your file vault personal recovery key inside of your MDM of choice. Use that to get into the computer. That's your break glass, your true lapse break glass account, and then this is just happens to be a user account that is on the machine. We'll automatically rotate it for you. You go out and you say you want that device to actually put the config profile on along with the package. Note, though, the scope that's over here on the right-hand side, you have to make sure that that stays on the machine. So the scope that's on the right side is how is that going to be determined to be on the machine permanently. I like using a pre-stage configuration as my smart computer group. So if this device is coming in from this pre-stage, therefore it should have this config profile on it forever. Keep in mind, though, that pre-stage configuration If you swap a computer around often, that does not get cleared in the MDM automatically. So Jamf Pro, if a device comes in on a re-enrollment and it was on pre-stage 1, 2, 3, and now it's on pre-stage XYZ, it still thinks it's on pre-stage 1, 2, 3 until it goes through its full initial recon. It's a little strange. So either for your test devices, you might want to delete the information out of Jamf Pro, or make sure you just don't change the pre-stage around too often. Lastly, we go in here. This is important, even if you do want to deploy and keep the Jamf Connect package up to date through the Mac App Store later, you do have to go in and say, set this up to deploy a version of Jamf Connect immediately as part of the pre-stage. You just need to grab the latest copy of jamfconnect.package, or I do have on my GitHub a cheater script that will always grab the latest copy and curl it down there for you. And if you do have any questions about getting that initial startup on there, we do have this QR code here with initial information on how to get it deployed out to your Macs. Would you like to try, or are you sure?
I'm going to defer to you.
All right, I'll keep
I will say, Sean had a great analogy or metaphor there with the cake, so you had to one-up me on that. So I was waiting.
I tried.
Waiting for a while. I was like, that was a good analogy with that medium rare cake. So anyways, I'm going to be now talking about the deployment of that Jamf Trust application, and then I'm going to take us into the security admin portal and kind of dive into some of the policies and how we'd help build that out. So I'm not going to touch too much on the first piece, but in terms of the VPP via Jamf Pro, I think we can go to the next one here. But essentially what I wanted to show here was that this works both for corporate devices as it does for user enrolled. So the idea being, if it's a fully managed Mac or a fully managed iOS device, then we push down Jamf Trust and it'd be acting as a DNS resolver for that whole device. In my pocket, or rather in my backpack, I have my user-enrolled BYO device, and instead of acting as the DNS resolver for the whole device, we're only on the business side. So we're able to encrypt access to Slack, Dropbox, a couple other dev apps, and not touch any of my personal information. So I just wanted to put this piece in here. I know you all are very familiar with how to add an Apple Business Manager, so I won't stress this slide anymore.
Just one little note to make sure that there is not the option selected. There's an option there to make an app managed if it's already installed. Do not check that. It will not work on a personally owned device. It just won't install no matter what.
That's awesome. The next piece is we actually would link to your identity provider. So this is more or less just an OIDC connection where we're able to bootstrap your IDP logins for your SaaS and your enterprise apps. From an admin perspective, you'll see here we have a couple examples with Entra or Azure, as with Google, Okta, and then if you need to use another IDP, we can always federate through Entra or through Azure. But really what happens is, as an admin, you set this piece up, then you can push out the Jamf Trust application, and then that user would then sign in with your company or your school or your organization's IDP. So it's just a one-time setup, and then like I said, it would just be a one-time sign-in for the end user. The next piece there is we build what we call an activation profile, where we essentially say, hey, I want to go ahead and push out these Jamf Connect functionalities that Sean and I have been touching on, but also maybe I want to push out Jamf Protect for the content filtering and for blocking things like phishing and on my general internet side. So what we would do here is we essentially give you the app config and the config profile to then upload that in Jamf Pro to try and make it easy on that deployment. Yeah, really quickly, this is the app config, and you'll see here on the left-hand side, we can essentially bootstrap that profile, which makes things like, user doesn't have to click on accept the VPN config, user doesn't have to accept notifications. We can just make that process a little bit easier. And the right-hand side is more on the protect side. So what that would look like from a Mac perspective is the user would sign in with IDP, and we'll touch on that piece in a little bit. But once that user signs in, they're able to access what other SaaS or enterprise apps they need to access. For whatever reason, if they needed to disable that, they can go ahead and disable it, but we're still going to be blocking things like phishing, cryptojacking, and content filtering through the use of that protect config that we pushed out a slide ago. So lastly, I'm going to talk about the deployment side. So we'll go to the last step here. So this will be maybe about 5 minutes before Sean and I will open it up for Q&A. So I wanted to talk to a couple use cases between SaaS and enterprise apps, where that least privilege access control really sits, some of the risk-based access controls, and then routing and reporting. So to start, I wanted to break this up into SaaS use cases and enterprise use cases. From a SaaS perspective, Perfect, yeah, awesome. Yeah, so we can essentially decide as an admin, do I want to push out access to Salesforce, to Outlook, to Slack, to Dropbox? Those would be the left-hand side, those publicly accessible apps. Like I said, because we have that OIDC connection when we linked up your IDP, we're essentially able to bootstrap those logins and we'll start routing the access to those SaaS applications. On the right-hand side, these are the apps that are sitting behind a firewall somewhere or in your private infrastructure or on-prem. We would essentially need to set up an IPsec gateway to get into those applications, which we'll get to in a little bit. One more slide here, Sean. And so from a SaaS perspective, essentially what happens is because you can do the least privilege access and you can say, hey, I only want to give access to certain users through the use of your IDP. But really where this comes into play is on having that risk-based access control as well as being able to, within your IDP, say, I only want to give access to Dropbox, to Slack, to email if a user has Jamf Trust on their device. What we essentially do is we add a conditional access rule in your identity provider and say, okay, well, I want to give Sean access to Slack, but is he accessing it on his spouse's laptop, or is he accessing it at the public library? He can't do that anymore because he has to be either on a BYO device or a managed device that is accessing this content through one of our IPs, which I'll show you in a little bit. Next slide here, Sean. And this next slide here really kind of highlights what I spoke about with my great Game of Thrones example here. So with that enterprise app, we're only allowing access to the contractors. So if it's a dev user, if it's a sales or marketing user, and they're trying to access that any subdomain within that star.company.com, the packet's going to be dropped before it actually reaches the AWS infrastructure side. So there's no chance for that lateral movement. It's all north and south saying, yes, Sean has access, or yes, that dev user has access. Let's go ahead and give them that per app, per connection microtunnel. On the other side, we have Apache and the RSA app. This is for a prior demo, but we can essentially route that for everyone, or we can even say, for these specific direct IPs, these specific subdomains, et cetera, we can go ahead and create a policy more holistically for everyone. Perfect. So to kind of how we would do that process, if we go to the next slide, we'll talk about kind of the two pieces, I'd say. So on the upper left, this is where we would create that custom IPsec site-to-site gateway. And essentially what happens here, we match the proposals and ciphers that I'm sure many of you are familiar with matching. But you'll see that Jamf security or Jamf subnet, the 192-24, really if you think back to that last slide about the contractors or that dev user, if they should have access to that application, then they're going to originate from that 192-24. They're going to originate from one of those IPs. If not, if it's a sales user or marketing user that's somehow trying to RDP into this AWS app, the packet's going to be dropped before it goes through the tunnel to the AWS side. So again, going back to that castle example, we're preventing that from even happening in your infrastructure. The bottom right piece here, I'll really quickly go over, is us essentially acting as the DNS forwarder, being able to resolve your internal host names. So essentially you would create the zone name, you would add the specific domains that you'd like us to resolve, and then you would add your authoritative name server, then you would route it out of that IPsec that we just created. Perfect. Almost done here, promise. This next piece here I wanted to highlight, this works both, again, for SaaS and enterprise apps, but this is the whole continuous conditional access check in which we're saying, hey, we've identified malware, we've identified a vulnerable OS or a device that doesn't have a passcode. We can essentially say, yes, we've established the right user, we've gone ahead and this is where we want to route it, but at this point in time, this ephemeral request, we're going to go ahead and block and make it so the user must remediate before they access their email or Salesforce. So we can do this on a per app basis, and we can also even present a really cool WYSI certificate that says, hey, you must turn on Jamf Trust to access email or to access Salesforce.
And I think important too, sort of not shown in this picture, but was because it wasn't available when we recorded it. We're also getting that signaling information from the MDM software as well. So if a device happens to fall into a group like, say, Jamf Protect finds a vulnerability on the device or a security event happens, we can then tell through a device-based risk access here to drop the network immediately.
Exactly, thank you for that, Sean. And to kind of double click on that, these are some of the threats that we can look at. So I would say from more on a mobile side, things like phishing, data leaks, and a lot of the network-related threats. But also that we do see that in the laptop space as well. And then we see malware, jailbroken devices, out-of-date OSs, and then as Sean alluded to, that vulnerable OS. So we have over 40 plus, but I just wanted to show a quick screen grab of some of the capabilities there. So what would this look like on an end user? Hey, I'm trying to access this Dropbox folder. Oh, I can't because I don't have a passcode or I have malware on my device. We will essentially tell the user through a push notification. We could tell them through an email. And also if the user opens that app, they'll get educated on what remediate steps they must take to access that SaaS or enterprise application. Cool. 2 slides and then we're done, I promise.
Don't worry, these people signed up to be
that's
here,
true,
so
that's true, that's
it's
true.
their fault.
I paid a couple of people to, no, I'm just kidding. So from a routing perspective, I wanted to kind of highlight the upper left is more on the SaaS side, so the ability to say, okay, I want to only allow the correct users, I want to allow devices that are safe and secure, but what if the users are traveling, Sean travels all over, as do I, to Florida, then to Canada, then to Europe. We can actually egress them out of the nearest data center, so we can still have the same security principles that we've been talking about and have talked about in our keynote, but we can do that in a very latency-friendly way. So kind of going back to the conditional access request and workflow, Microsoft or Okta or Google, whatever your IDP might be, would still see your device egressing through a data center, but it would just be the one closest to that user, so it's very latency-friendly. And on the bottom right, again, this would be when we create those access policies to your on-prem infrastructure or to your private cloud infrastructure, we would either choose that static gateway or we can even do group gateways for high availability disaster recovery. And last but not least, we can give you specific reporting details and say, hey, these are the users' access, these are the platforms that they access it on. And my favorite screen in our whole Jamf Security Cloud portal is that bottom right one, because I think it's a very cool Tableau dashboard in which we're seeing on a per app, per connection basis, which users accessing that application. Are we routing it through a shared IP? Is it direct to their AWS or their GCP environment? Or is it denied for that risk-based access control? And then we'll show each of those requests. So without further ado, maybe...
You want to see it in action?
Yeah.
All right.
Let's show it.
Good. Just a warning to our dear loving hosts. This is a YouTube video, so it's possible that there might be audio playing over there for you. Just feel free to kill that there. Not that we don't love our fellow...
Our audio.
Our audio there that's coming through. Let's see. Will it play? Nope. Let's try again.
One more try. I have to click on it. Can we maybe click on the video?
Yeah. We tried turning it on and turning it off again. It's always the answer. This worked great before, just so you know. So. Live video.
Oh, there we go. It's going, Sean. It's just we can't see it on the...
Oh, there we go.
Sorry about that.
It doesn't show on the preview monitor. There we go.
We are bad at this.
Okay, so we're going to walk you through this just a little bit here. This was recorded earlier and is available online. Our dear loving boss, Matt Blasak, made this. So here is your zero-touch onboarding experience. You've probably seen a video just like this before. Here's one thing that you can do before this point that I would highly recommend is you make sure that enrolling into the Jamf Pro server is also gated with a single sign-on provider. That way nobody can go in and spoof to say, hey, I'm trying to enroll a device in there. This is Jamf Connect creating the very first user account. Whatever multi-factor authentication rule, whatever conditional access policy you want to apply here, except for using hardware authenticator tokens plugged into the side of the device can work. Ask Apple about that. As part of your onboarding process, this is, of course, the classic onboarding process still where you can hold the user in Setup Assistant. I can get some essentials onto the device like Jamf Protect, for example, before they're allowed to wreak havoc, use the machine. Now, sir, not appearing in that little flash there was what we haven't gotten quite recorded yet, which is the login from macOS can be passed to Jamf Trust to automatically start the Jamf Trust session. There was a little bit of magic that happened there because we recorded it earlier. But in this particular case, because that user has automatically started the ZTNA solution, that means that they can get into any resources like protected websites or even log into their, in this particular case, it's an Exchange 365 server gated with an Okta login federation. So that was just showing the single sign-on extension for enterprise. That user is now logged into anything that would be gated with, in this case, Okta from now on forever and ever. If we turn off the ZTNA solution, we turn off Jamf Trust, what's going to happen?
We still get that network protection. So the user is going to try and go, well, first, the user is going to try to access that business resource, and they're going to get disconnected. So again, that conditional access workflow, and you'll see test with Connect turned off. Hey, we're not able to get that access. So the user must turn back on Jamf Trust in order to get access to that business app. But the second piece here is that if we were to turn off the Jamf Trust application, we're still going to get that network protection. So maybe your users don't want to have this app turned on for whatever reason. We still have the ability to protect things like phishing, cryptojacking, spam, even content filtering. So it provides both the secure access to your SaaS and enterprise applications and also the network protection in which we'll push this great-looking cert. But yeah, just to re-emphasize what we went over here, it's super cool because we're basically able to utilize the same certificate that Sean went through in his great write-up and walkthrough with that ZTNA access. So not only is the user able to have this really seamless experience, but they don't even have to sign in on their Mac computer. Albeit if they're using iOS or Android or Windows, they would have to sign in with that one-time IDP. But this is actually what was just announced, I think this morning, right? So that's why we were a little hush-hush with, with the demo there. So yeah, thank you all for joining us here. Unless you have anything else to add.
I'm going to cut into our Q&A time just a
Yeah.
little teeny tiny bit with this. Number one, there is a QR code here that goes over everything that we talked about in our presentation today. But why the hell is all this stuff important now? Our process of trying to make the user experience better with things like the single sign-on extension means that we could potentially have a computer that is compromised or something has happened to it or malware exists on it or they just did something silly, right? We need to be able to tell the identity provider, don't give this user any tokens. That's conditional access. We need to be able to block network access to essential resources. That's Jamf Trust. We need to be able to report back to all these devices and detect it. That's Jamf Protect. We need to know who's actually using our dang computers. That's Jamf Connect. That's the trusted access concept. And that's why it's all essential to use it together. Is that a great answer? I hope so, because it keeps me employed. But more importantly, it keeps our organization's data and information and potentially even employees protected. So thank you very much for joining, and we appreciate you listening today.
All right, thank you. So for those that maybe didn't, type in questions, because I do have some. So we'll just get into it. So we do have a handful. We'll start with, if you change the version of Jamf Connect in your config profile, will it erase the settings you had configured for a previous version?
I'm assuming that this question is based off of if I'm changing my configuration inside Jamf Pro itself. So if you're in Jamf Pro and you're setting up your config profile in Jamf Pro where you can go in and pick in the little GUI there, if you change the version number, it erases what's currently in that, what's in that current configuration. You can go in and hit plist view though, select everything from the current version, and then paste it into the new version. And again, remember, you don't need to do anything with version numbers unless you're specifically looking to grab a brand new key that was just added to maybe the latest version of Jamf Connect. You don't have to change the version number unless you absolutely, positively want that new key added in. You can also have multiple config profiles with just that one key added in if you wanted to. You don't have to go crazy. You don't have to recreate it every single time. Or do what I do and just copy pasta right in there as a plist. Then I can do whatever changes I need to afterwards.
So there were a couple of questions that were kind of floating in on a similar theme. So I'm going to summarize, but basically around the idea of Apple's announcement with Platform SSO, Jamf Connect. What does it actually mean? And what is the future of Connect? Obviously, forward-looking statements, but I think all questions that we have on our mind of where that is. So if you can maybe touch on that a bit.
The first order of business is, this is going to be a short answer, and the longer answer is available on YouTube right now as my Penn State University Mac admin session that was done over the summer here. So if you look for PSU Mac admins Sean Rabbit on YouTube, it'll come right up. Platform single sign-on is probably going to be the future for ongoing password sync for a single user on a computer. I think it's a great idea for replacing the idea of the ROPG flow. I think it's great for keeping a password in sync for a user. I love its design for making sure that that single sign-on it gets you into all the other resources. Remember that the purpose of platform single sign-on is single sign-on. I want to get you in your Mac. I want to get you into your Entra ID gated resources. I want to get you into your whatever, your Okta resources without having to sit there and type your password 27 times a day. It's the user account creation that's the important part here. So even when macOS Sonoma comes out in the next week, no identity provider currently has any support for the macOS login window. And when they do have support for creating user accounts at the macOS login window, there is a process that an administrator has to physically touch the computer and enroll that computer and get a device activation token and get it into shared device mode, and they got to do that almost entirely manually. So for those folks out there doing a zero-touch enrollment of a device, it might just be, here's your new computer wrapped in cellulose, excellent, drop it off, here, Mr. User, please turn it on for the first time. Jamf Connect creates the user account, PSSO might do the password sync in the future. Or it might just be that your identity provider never gives support for platform single sign-on, or anything futuristic at all in the slightest. I'm not naming names today, but there's 2 identity providers that currently support single sign-on, and it's been out for almost 5 years. So unless your identity provider is either at Microsoft or Okta, you won't have platform single sign-on.
And that was a short answer. So.
That was a short answer.
Go to the YouTube.
No, perfect, and I know we're getting close to time, so maybe just a couple more. This might be an extension of what we were just talking about. Would Jamf Connect plus Entra ID, would that do the same and sign you into any app that uses OAuth tokens for Office 365?
Specifically to how does the platform single sign-on extension or single sign-on extension work? They're 2 different things. Jamf Connect is different than single sign-on extension. That's important.
So if the user anonymous is in the room?
So yeah, anonymous user, if you just have Jamf Connect and you're trying to log into O365, sorry, that's not going to work. If you have Jamf Connect and you deployed out the single sign-on extension, the user's got to log in twice, but it should get you into any resource gated, any cloud resource gated with Microsoft Entra ID at that point. If it doesn't, go yell at somebody over here.
Cool. And then the best way to update Jamf Connect, is that using app installers? And does this handle unloading it when the launch agent keeps it alive?
Yep. I like app installers the best. I think it's the simplest answer out there for being able to deploy things out. The post-installer script that gets installed with that app installer is the exact same post-installer script that is for just the version you download from account.jamf.com. The post-installer script is smart enough to see that a copy of Jamf Connect is currently running, either through the login screen or through the just the menu bar agent running. We'll kill it and auto log in back again with the launch agent.
Okay, we're going to do one more because why not?
I answered fast.
Yeah. If you're shutting down the network after sensing a vulnerability, is there any notification in the console with an alert?
Haha, that's me.
See, this
Thank you for that. Yeah, so the user would get that pop-up page that we saw there. They'll also get an alert in the Jamf Security Cloud. What a lot of security and IT folks do, though, is they'll send those alerts to their SIM or SOAR so we can help build out further dashboards there. So short answer is yes, but we can do some further third-party things as well.
Awesome. That was a lot to unpack. So if they have and when they have questions, where can they find the 2 of you?
You can date our brains at the brain dates.
Yeah,
we both, I believe, have
dates,
different brain dates, right?
3:30.
Yep. So there's definitely one at least today, and one tomorrow, and one on Thursday for me. There's also additional sessions, and there is also a Jamf Connect with ZTNA hands-on workshop that's happening both this afternoon, all 3 days. So if you want to go to that hands-on workshop, you can, or also check out trainingcatalog.jamf.com for a lot of the simulators and additional information.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.